Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Johnston, Policy Counsel for Federal Programs with Next Century Cities. Over the course of the Show Me Your Maps campaign, we've heard a lot from local and state officials about how they use data that's already available to them to help inform their decisions when it comes to broadband deployment. One of the largest and most well-known data sets in broadband deployment is the FCC's Form 477 data. And while there's always a large amount of discussion that surrounds this data, its accuracy, and how it can be improved, there's relatively little by way of explanation as to where this data lives and how a layperson can interpret it. So today, I'd like to take a few minutes to go over Form 477 data, where you can find it, and once you found the data that you're looking for, how you can interpret the data that's there. So to start, what is Form 477 data? Well, Form 477 is a required filing that all facilities-based providers are required to submit to the FCC. Each provider has to do this twice a year. So fixed providers are required to file a list of the census blocks in which they could or do offer service to at least one location, and mobile providers are required to submit maps detailing their coverage areas for each broadband technology that they support. So things like 5G, LTE, high-speed packet access, which is a type of 3G, etc. But where does this information live? Well, all of it is publicly available on the FCC's website, although it's not that easy to find. There's no specific link that will take you directly to the data. Instead, from the FCC's main page, you would use the Licensing and Databases tab, to select forms, and from there you would scroll down until you reach the Form 477 section of the page. You would then choose the Form 477 resources link, and from the related links on the box on the right-hand side of that screen, you would then select the type of data that you're looking for. That's a fairly long and convoluted process. So for ease, today I've went ahead and copied the links to the fixed broadband and mobile deployment. Both of these links will also be available in the description of this video. So when we're looking at the data for fixed providers, generally, this data is available in a CSV or a comma-separated values worksheet that anyone with access to a spreadsheet software such as Excel will be able to access. And now that we have a section of data, what exactly does this mean? So here I've listed out the column headings for the CSV file that I've just showed. The log rec number is the record number that's created to help relate changes in Form 477 data to prior releases of the same. The provider ID is the number that the FCC has assigned to the filing, and the FRN is the FCC's registration number that's assigned to the provider. The DBA name is a name that is used by the FCC for providers that do not operate under their registered company name. HOCO num and HOCO final are the name and number attributed and assigned by the FCC respectively. So these are things like a parent organization or an umbrella company that is administering a local or regional provider. The state abbreviation is just that, the state abbreviation. A block code is the census block code that was used in 2010 for the block the provider is reporting service in. The tech code is a 2-digit code that indicates the type of technology used. There are 14 of these codes, and I will link to what all of these codes mean in the description below. Consumer is an indicator of whether a provider offers mass market or residential services. 0 is no, and 1 is yes, which leads us to max add down and max add up. These are the maximum advertised upload and download and upload speeds a provider advertises for. And business, much like consumer, is an indicator. It indicates if a provider does or does not offer business or government services. Again, 0 is no, 1 is yes. So what does this all mean? Well, if we go back to our picture from a few slides ago, we can see that there is a provider in Oregon that provides advertised maximum speeds of 40 megabits per second download and 1 megabit per second upload. If we look at the tech code, it shows that they provide terrestrial fixed wireless service. And if we look at the consumer and business, it also shows that they provide mass market and business services as well. So for mobile deployment data, it's slightly different. For mobile providers are required to submit shape files that depict and analyze geospatial data. And to view these types of files, GIS software is required. These types of software include ArcMap, QGIS, MapInfo, and the like. In these files, providers are required to report what the minimum speeds are that users should expect. However, through June 30th of 2019, providers could request that this data be treated as confidential and therefore it wouldn't be released publicly. That makes looking at historical data slightly different because there may be gaps or it might not just be there at all. Similarly, through June 30th of 2019, providers were also required to submit separate shape files for each spectrum band that they used for each mobile technology. Again, this data was allowed to be requested to be treated as confidential, and if it was treated as such, it would not be released to the public. I am going to apologize at this point for not having a visual example of this data. I don't have access to GIS software, and therefore I'm not able to manipulate the raw data files. So what other types of information are tracked by the FCC through Form 477? Well, the first is internet access based on census tract. So I've included a link here to that data, and it'll be also be in the description below. But this data tracks two speed tiers per census tract. The first is the number of residential households per thousand that have a connection over 200 kilobits per second in one direction, and the other is how many households per thousand have access to 10 megabits per second download and 1 megabit per second upload. Now, rather than reporting the actual number of households per thousand, the FCC denotes these connections by code numbers. So in this case, a 0 equals no connections, 1 equals a number between 0 and 200 connections, 2 between 2 and 400, 3 between 4 and 600, 4 between 6 and 800, and 5 is greater than 800. If we look at the example of the data that I've pulled, generally we can see that internet access based on census tract as reported by Form 477 is fairly high. And finally, we have the FCC's collection of Form 477 filers by state. So the FCC tracks which companies file Form 477 data by state. And this data includes the particular state a provider is operating in, if they have any affiliate names, whether or not they are an ILEC, a web address for them, and the types of services that they offer. So unfortunately, this data is less useful for determining where services are, but may be helpful in helping communities find potential partners if that's something that they've decided to do, or maybe look at for people that they might be able to send a request for proposals to if that's something that they've decided to undertake. All in all, the FCC collects quite a large bit of data. And while the accuracy of that data is certainly just debatable, it is something that is available to the public. And it is something that we need to actually put into the hands of people that could use it. State or local officials oftentimes might not have any idea that this data even exists, and therefore might be missing out on a crucial resource that they could use to say, our area isn't served. So making sure that these resources that are put out by the FCC are accessible and understandable is crucially important. Again, my name is Ryan Johnston, the Policy Counsel for Federal Programs with Next Century Cities. I appreciate you taking the time to have this discussion with me today. And if there are any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Thank you. Bye-bye.